Good morning, students. Today we are going to deal with the new topic, that is the quasi contracts. Quasi contracts means almost or apparently but not really or as it if it were. So this is quasi contracts means like. It is not a contract, but it is like a contract. It has all the features of a contract, but it is not a formally entered into by the parties to a contract. So quasi means almost or apparently or not really, but it is like. Obligation between the parties is not there. Contractual, but one which is treated as a contractual by law. Courts create quasi contracts to protect the unjust enrichment. Unjust म्हणजे अवाजवी, गैरवाजवी श्रीमंती of the parties in dispute over payment of goods or services. Now let us discuss it in a very detail. Quasi means almost or apparently. Contract means an agreement enforceable by law. So quasi contract is not a contract at all, because the essential elements for the formation of a contract are absent. It is an obligation imposed by law upon a person for the benefit of another, even in the absence of a contract. So it is not a formally created contract. Keep in mind, there is a difference between a contract and a quasi contract. Contract is to be created by the parties by entering into an agreement, but there is no agreement in a quasi contract. It is an obligation, एक प्रकारचं बंधन, which has been imposed by the court of law for the benefit of the members of that contract or the part and parcel of that contract, and for the purpose of preventing unjust enrichment. Now let us discuss what it is actually, because the essential elements for the formation of the contracts are absent. Keep in mind, it is an obligation imposed by law upon a person for the benefit of a the other person. It is based on the principle of equity. Equity means samanta. For example, let us I would like to cite here an example. Suppose in case there is one plumber who accidentally install a sprinkler system, for example any system, water system, sprinkling system, in the lawn of the wrong house. Suppose Mr. A is there. He has invited that plumber to install a sprinkler in his lawn, but by mistakenly that plumber comes and he installs the sprinkler in the other Mr. B's lawn or B's garden. The owner of the house had learnt the previous day that his neighbor was getting new sprinkler. Now the person upon whose land, upon whose garden, or in the garden of whom the sprinkler is being set up or is being installed, that person knows, the owner knows that this person wrongfully came in my land and is building or erecting or that sprinkler in my land, but he keeps mum. He remains silent. He doesn't speak, and he knows yesterday, he had come to the knowledge yesterday that his neighbor, actually the person who has demanded that sprinkler or ordered that sprinkler, is going to build that sprinkler or install that sprinkler. But despite of knowing this, the other person who is the neighbor, Mr. B, still he keeps mum himself, and he thinks that okay, he is building, he is installing, that plumber is installing, let him install. So because he thinks that he will get benefits for wrongful act of the plumber, but it is not so. Let us discuss further. The owner of the house had learned previous day that his neighbor was getting new sprinkler. That morning he sees the plumber is installing them in his own land, but he doesn't speak anything, and he pleased at the mistake done by the plumber. He says nothing, he keeps mum, and then refuses to pay when the plumber hands him the bill. After installing that sprinkler, plumber gives the bill to that man, but he says, I have not ordered the sprinkler, I had not demanded. Wrongfully you have entered into my land, into my garden, and installed that sprinkler. This is what the quasi contract. Now plumber, when he tries to hand over the actual bill of that sprinkler to that customer, he denies that, refuses to pay the amount, and when the plumber hands him the bill, now it comes under this quasi contract, because the man already knew that the sprinkler were being installed mistakenly in his court. In spite of that, he permits him, he keeps mum, and silence amounts to the permission, and it is come under of a quasi contract. I think you have might got my point. And under this contract, he is liable to pay the charges for that sprinkler, though he has not demanded or ordered from that plumber. Still, he has to pay whatever the amount required for that installation of that sprinkler. This is called a This is called a quasi contract or quasi contract. Actually, it is called a quasi contract. So, doctrine of a quasi contract. Let us discuss what is the tattva, what is the principle of a quasi contract. Unjust enrichment that must be prevented. That the owner is wanted, he wanted to become unjustly rich. He was thinking that freely I'm getting that installment of that sprinkler. Let's get, no problem. But it doesn't happen. It is not law. So unjust enrichment is prevented, and it declares that the person shall not be allowed to become rich himself at the expenses of the other person or unknown parties. Quantum merits means the actual value of the service performed. It determines the amount to be paid for the services when no contract exists, or when there is a doubt as to the amount due for the work performed but done under circumstances when payment could be expected. Now, what are the salient features of a quasi contract? Quasi contracts. A quasi contract is not a real contract. All the elements of a contract is absent. It is not based upon the offer and acceptance rule. It does not arise from any formal agreement, but it is imposed by law. It is a right which is available not against the entire world, but against the particular person. What is the difference between the contract and the quasi contract? This is we have to discuss. Contracts, it is a result from the will of the parties expressed with a view to create an obligation amongst them. But it is an obligation resembling that to be created by a contract, but actually it is not created. It is an agreement. There is no agreement between the parties. In a quasi contract, there has certain essential elements. In a quasi contract, there are lack of essentials elements of a contract for the formation of a contract, which are absent. Thereafter, it is a full-fledged contract. Contract is a full-fledged contract, and it is binding upon the party. Whereas the quasi contract, it resembles to a contract. It is not a full-fledged contract. There are absence of essential elements to that, and it is, we can say, it is an implied contract between the party. Now, what are the types of the quasi contract? It is made especially for the supply of necessities. It is made especially for the payment by an interested person. It is to be made for the purpose of obligation to pay for non-gratuitous acts, responsibility of the finder of goods, and mistake or coercion. Under that circumstances, this type of a quasi contracts can be created. Let us discuss supply of necessaries to incapable persons. Suppose if a person incapable or minor of entering into a contract, or anyone whom he is legally bound to support. I would like to cite here only example. Suppose A supplies B a lunatic. B is a lunatic, Vedai, with the necessaries suitable for his condition in his life, for his eatings, for his eateries. A is entitled to be reimbursed from B's property. This is a quasi contract. Payment by interested persons. Let us see the example. Mr. A holds a land in Bengal on a lease. B is the owner of the land. The land revenue payable by B to the government is an arrears, and therefore the government advertised the land for a sale to recover the dues. To prevent the sale of land, A pays the arrears of land revenues. In this case, B is bound to reimburse the amount to Mr. B. Payment for non-gratuitous acts. For example, Mr. A tradesman, leaves his goods at B's house by mistake. Suppose, फॉर एक्झाम्पल, मी काही ऑर्डर केलेलं आहे अमेझॉनवरून, आणि अमेझॉनवरून माझ्या शेजारच्या घरात ते गुड्स गेलेले आहे. बी ट्रीट्स द गुड्स ॲज हिज ओन, आणि तो शेजार काय म्हणतो, ओके आलेला आहे, मला पाहिजेच होतं, चुकून आलेलं आहे, आणि तो घेतो. ही ट्रीट्स हिज दॅट गुड्स, दोज गुड्स ॲज हिज ओन अँड युजेस देम. बी इज बाउंड टू पे फॉर द गुड्स. payment for non-gratuitous acts. लायबिलिटी ऑफ द फाइंडर ऑफ गुड्स. सपोज फाइंडर ऑफ गुड्स म्हणजे माझा बटवा किंवा माझी प्रॉपर्टी हरवलेली आहे रस्त्यावर, माझा मोबाईल हरवलेला आहे आणि एकाला मोबाईल सापडलेला आहे. So a person who finds the goods belonging to another and takes them into his custody is subject to same responsibility as a bail. He must take reasonable care of the goods and keep them in a sound condition and try to find out its true owner. After finding out, after making a reasonable search of the owner of the goods, if he doesn't find, then he can use those goods. And suppose the later on he finds that actual owner of those goods he found on the street, then he has to resubmit, return back those goods to the true owner of the goods. For that purpose, suppose he takes care of those goods, he cleans those goods, he mends those goods, then he has to, as a bailman, he has to give back whatever the amount he has invested upon that object, upon that mobile, upon that property, and he has for the purpose of taken care, that must be rendered back to the finder of the goods by the actual owner of those goods. So this is what we have discussed. Thank you very much.